Hi, this is Justin Keay, Field Specialist in Horticulture with MU Extension. I get a lot of questions from fruit and vegetable growers interested in organic fertility management. And they have questions about how raw manure, compost, cover crops, and organic fertilizers are best used in terms of an overall soil management strategy. If we looked at all these factors together, they have a big impact on plant growth and yield. Today, we're going to focus on organic fertilizers and come back to some of these other topics in subsequent videos. Folks might wonder, how important is it to fertilize my crops? Well, in a meta-analysis of many different studies, it was found that organic fertilizers applied based on soil testing recommendations enhanced yield in organic tomatoes by 42%. So adding appropriate fertility inputs and soil testing make a big impact on yield. This can mean harvesting a crop or harvesting a crop with optimal yields. And if we think of everything it takes from seed to sale, managing weeds, labor, insects, disease, and irrigation, fertility management can help us make informed decisions based on soil testing and also tissue testing. Fertility management can really be dialed in with testing and application of amendments and fertilizers. So in some ways, this is a lot easier to manage than things like weeds, insects, and diseases. So it's a decision of whether you want to grow organically by neglect or have very proactive organic management. If we look at conventional or synthetic fertilizers, these are oftentimes water soluble, they're easy to find, they can be immediate or metered release. There's no microbes involved in the process of releasing these nutrients. There's a lot of options for fertigation or fertilizing through drip lines, and it's a little easier to estimate the available fertilizer in the soil at any given time. With organic or non-synthetic fertilizers, there's few water-soluble options. These are generally medium to slow release, and microbes are required to release these nutrients to plant roots. This nutrient release is dependent on time, temperature, and moisture. In terms of fertigation, there's few available sources and they can be pretty pricey. It's a little bit more challenging in organic systems to estimate the release of nutrients from these organic fertilizer sources. When we add cover crops to the mix, organic fertility management gets a little bit more complicated. So if we look at organic fertilizers in particular, they can be grouped together things of animal origin, things of mineral origin, plant-derived, blended, different blended components from one of these three categories. They could be processed or pelletized manures, and you can also look at things like compost. So if you are a certified organic grower, generally OMRI materials are allowed, but definitely check with your certifier before you're bringing in any new inputs on the farm. If we look at organic fertilizers a little differently as it relates to their proportion of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, we have nitrogen-rich organic fertilizers, which many organic farms build up high levels of phosphorus and potassium and get to a point where they need to focus only on nitrogen management. But there are also phosphorus-rich and potassium-rich organic fertilizers as well. We can also look at more complete fertilizers, which have a fairly balanced ratio or proportion of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Sometimes these are pelletized manure, such as chicken manure, which has a fairly balanced ratio, or it could be a blended fertilizer, where different animal, plant, and mineral components are combined to create certain analysis of fertilizers. I mentioned fertigation. I know there's interest in using fertigation or pushing fertilizer through drip lines. There are some options with organics. There's some nitrogen-rich options, some potassium-rich options, as well as some phosphorus-rich options. There's also blended options where they're taking multiple components here and blending them together to get a little more balanced ratio of nutrients. One of the challenges with organic fertigation is there may be a clogging of the pre-filters or drip emitters. This can result from particles. It can also result from a buildup of biofilm. So as these organic materials are pushed through drip lines, bacteria can multiply rapidly and create kind of a slime within those drip lines, which can slow down or clog up the water coming through those lines. So it's best to test these first in your system, see if they're clogging your filters or your drip lines, and it's suggested to flush the system to prevent this kind of buildup of these particles or biofilms in the emitters. So a soil test is kind of the foundation to understand how much fertilizer you need or what kind of mineral nutrients are necessary to support crop growth. So this is kind of a blown up picture of one of our soil tests. So if we look over here on the left, we have a pH of 6.5. So that's a good pH for tomatoes. Phosphorus levels are pretty high. Potassium is very high. We have 5.9% organic matter, which is a good level. We like to see garden vegetables about 4 to 6%. For this crop, we selected tomatoes, and the recommendation we got was 90 pounds of nitrogen and 25 pounds of phosphorus. So most soil tests will require a larger application of nitrogen and a smaller application of phosphorus and or potassium. So let's take a look at this 90 pounds of nitrogen and 25 pounds of phosphorus. How are we going to get those nutrients down? Well, I showed you some options from different fertilizers that you could choose from. A lot of what you decide on is going to depend on what's available to you and what are the freight costs to get those materials to your farm or to your property. One way that's helpful to kind of compare these different costs and what fertilizers make sense is a really cool tool from University of Georgia called the UGA Fertilizer Calculator. You see on the left-hand side here, this is the pane that you will pull up initially when you visit the site. I've selected to get recommendations in pounds per acre. I take the numbers off of the soil test, 90 pounds of N, 25 pounds of phosphorus, and I select pounds per square feet or pounds per acre. So I have a quarter acre plot here. An acre is 43,560 square feet. So I divided that by 4. We have 10,890 square feet. So we're going to get recommendations on how much to apply for this unit area. Below, you can select available fertilizer grades, or you can actually input your own fertilizer grades. In one of the previous slides, I mentioned feather meal as a good source of nitrogen. So I've taken feather meal and I've gotten the cost per pound input here. So that cost per pound, you can basically take the price of the bag and divide it by the number of pounds in the bag, and you will get a cost per pound. So I have the feather meal at 73 cents a pound, and then I have a 342 pelletized chicken manure that's 47 cents a pound. So we have all the information we need here: the recommendations, the size of the unit area, the fertilizers, their nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium ratios, and the cost per pound. Then we can simply click calculate, and we'll get a nice table here. Now, if we look a little bit more closely at this table, we can see that we have recommendations in each of these 3 rows. Let's just take a look at the top one here. It's telling us to put 137 pounds of feather meal and 156 pounds of 342 pelletized chicken manure for this quarter acre plot. If we look at the NPK here, we have surpluses in blue and deficits in red. So with this recommendation, we have good amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus, no surplus or deficit. We have a little bit of surplus of potassium. For each of these fertilizer combinations, it gives you a score, and that's based off of whether there's a surplus or deficit of any given nutrients. So the top ranked score here is 80, and it actually gives us the cost to get those fertilizers down on a quarter acre plot. We can step down and see we got a little bit cheaper. This is going just with a feather meal, 173 pounds. We have a little bit of a deficit here in phosphorus, but you can try to go with the highest score, but some of these decisions might be based off of the price of these different components and what you can afford to put down in terms of fertilizer. But this is a really powerful tool. It's just a couple simple steps to get to this point. You can run different scenarios with different fertilizers, review these scores and costs, work to minimize excesses and deficiencies. We want to be careful when we're applying excess phosphorus and nitrogen in particular, because this can lead to nutrient pollution from runoff of these nutrients into bodies of water. But this is a really helpful tool. I hope this is helpful to you folks. And if you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out. Happy to help and answer any questions you may have.